So today we're going to be talking about Git basics, an introduction to the Git and Wakanda workflow. My name is Greg McCarville. I'm the Director of Wakanda Business Development, and we're going to be covering this topic and what Studio offers built-in from start to finish. So the first question is, what is Git? If you're not familiar with it, it's a leading source code management software system. It's open source and it's free, and essentially it has two main goals, and those are code versioning and collaboration. So you can take your project folder with your source code and essentially create what's termed in Git as commits. And these are snapshots of your source code files, can be many files in each commit, and allows you to fast forward and rewind through those different states of your project. And collaboration is obviously working with other developers. Git's excellent at allowing you to work with other developers, mesh your different changes to your source code together, and help manage the any conflicts that you create as you're developing. So Git's known to be very performant and flexible, and that's why it's become popular. It's lightweight, quick, and allows for many different scenarios in software development. So why did we choose Git? Well, the commonly known benefits, it's speedy, it's lightweight, and it's open source, were all definite factors in the decision. And it's been becoming a standard in this space. For instance, in 2011, about 13% of developers were using Git in some fashion, and just a year later it was up to 27%. So it's got a lot of momentum behind it, and that makes it so that there's third-party services and an ecosystem of tools and learning resources that will be there going forward. So we all felt that those were important things. As far as the services, you know, GitHub's one good example, but there are many service providers in the Git ecosystem. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about installing Git and applying some common settings. Git is a separate software package. So Wakanda Studio is one piece of software, and we'll need to install Git separately in order to have Wakanda Studio interact with it. We'll be, I've already created 2 GitHub accounts, but I'll be showing you that service and getting you a basic understanding of GitHub, as it's a great way to share code. We're going to talk about the benefits of using Git locally and local commits. There's a lot of places where even as a single one-person development shop, using Git locally can be a huge benefit to you as well. We're going to do some examples of how you might collaborate with other developers using GitHub or Wakanda Server as your Git server. And I'm going to do a brief introduction to a tool called DIFFMERGE, which is again a third piece of software that helps you manage conflicts between changes in your application. So in our next Git session, we'll be doing another Git webinar down the road, probably in a month or so. We're going to talk about Wakanda as a Git server in a more advanced way. We're going to talk about collaborating inside of your own network. Things like GitHub obviously is hosted in the cloud service. So we're going to talk about doing Git within your own network, do's and don'ts with what's built into Wakanda Studio, and future feature plans. This is a first introduction. In fact, the version I'm going to be working with today is from the development channel. So keep that in mind. We're in the very beginning phases of what we're going to be offering with Git built into Studio, and we do have a lot of future features that we want to bring forward. I'm going to talk about best practices using the built-in tools, and we'll do a basic deployment using Git. Other topics we're going to cover, there are other GUIs. There's one from Atlassian called SourceTree that I'm a fan of, as well as GitHub has their own Git client, a graphical interface. So we'll cover both of those. Most people, I'd say the majority, deal with Git through the command line, through terminal, and we'll be looking at using Git in that fashion. It's a very effective way of using the product, very quick and lightweight. We'll talk about branching and merging, which is a huge part of Git, not available in the Wakanda built-in tools as of yet, so we'll be covering that. Submodules is a possibility that we may cover. It depends on time, and we'll probably schedule that for early to mid-April. So let's talk about installation and setup. The website for Git is www.git-scm.com. It has very easy installers. I've installed both on Windows and Mac, and the default setup worked fine for me. Windows gives you an option of using Git Bash as a terminal. That's the one thing on Windows. Mac has a terminal built in. You'll need a better alternative on Windows, and Git Bash is one of those options. So let's take a look at the GitHub or the Git website. So git-scm.com, and you'll see it directs you based on your platform to the latest download. You download, it's a standard installer, click through, install, and it works fine. And we're going to, when you do install, I'm going to recommend that there's two settings you set up right away. Is your global username and your global email. And the reason you do that is it helps organize the code when you're committing in a collaborative way. You can see on the left, that's an example from the documentation currently in the Wakanda site, and you can see it just sets up a generic username, as opposed to the lower right. This is where I've set up two users, my real user McCarville and then a fake one, and it basically sets it up so you can see who's committed code and who's done different parts of the work, and it makes it a lot more clean when you're working with other people. So that's why I would do those two settings. So there are settings within Wakanda Studio as well. You want to specify your default credentials. So you can set, if you don't have a solution open, you go into the Git settings, those settings will apply to every solution. Of course, you can override those specifically for a different solution, so you may use GitHub on one solution and not on another. You can even use different GitHub accounts. You can choose your diff and merge tools, which I mentioned we are going to use DIFFMERGE here. And it adds contents automatically to your .gitignore file. Your gitignore essentially is a map for Git to understand which files not to commit to the repository. And those are things like probably your log files, your data files, and files that change very frequently but don't affect the application itself. And those are good ones to leave out of the repository. So just make sure when you do start a new project in Wakanda, or in Studio anyhow, Git is enabled by default. So if you're working on an existing project, there is a setting in the project settings where it can be turned off as a service. So make sure that it is on. So let's take a quick look at Wakanda Studio. And right here in the top of Studio, you'll see a Git menu. And this is how you get to your settings right here. So you can see I have it set up as my default settings without a solution. So this was what will come up automatically for any new solution that I do make. So let's talk about local commits. So local commits, you can make changes to a group of files and revert back to a previous state. And that's the real power of a local commit, is it gives you the freedom to experiment without having major disastrous consequences. You can go off on an experimental tangent, make a lot of changes to your files, and know that if you go the wrong way, there's always a point in the past that you can revert to and reset your project to that point in the past, and all of the files will be back to that previous state. It's generally a good idea to make commits based on groups of functional code. So if you have a specific feature you're working on, if you work specifically on that feature, when you've done your work on that feature or you've gone to a certain point, do commit in common themed groups where your code is all in one general direction, one theme, and given an appropriate description. And you'll see that as we go forward. Currently in Wakanda Studio, you can only revert back to your last commit. I will show you in command line how to go back through multiple commits, but future implementations of our built-in functionality will allow going backwards or forwards multiple commits. So let's do a demo of local commits. So I'm in Wakanda Studio here, and I'm going to make a new solution, and we'll call it my application, and I'll put a number at the end just to make sure it's unique. First thing you need to notice is that you have the option to create your Git repository right off the bat, and I'm going to suggest you do that. I've added a new project to this solution as well. We'll click OK, and you can see on the desktop here it's created my folder. So let's open up the folder and I'll show you what's been created. I have invisible files set to be visible in my operating system here. You probably won't see these two files, but here's the Git-Ignore that was generated by Wakanda Studio with these contents, and like I said, that's to specify which files are not included in your Git repository. It's also created a git.git folder, and this is all of the internal functionality of Git and your repository, well, your repository itself, and you'll never touch these unless you're an advanced user. So I'm just showing you this so that you know what happened, but generally speaking, outside of possibly the Git-Ignore, I don't think that you'll be modifying these if you're using the Wakanda built-in tools. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start modifying this project, and you'll see that we have green icons here. These signify that we are currently in sync with our local repository, and we'll be changing that soon. I'm going to open up the index.html, and we're just going to build a fake layout here. And you can see as I go, as the files change here, this signifies that we have a new file that's not included in our Git repository called application.css. I'm going to make a button here, and I'm going to name them sequentially. So that'll be button 1. We'll make another button here. Button 2. Actually, and what I'm going to do when I save this, you'll see that now the index has a red icon signifying that, so we've got 2 new files that need to be added to the repository as well as 1 changed file. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to go up to the Git menu and go commit locally. And you'll see we can leave a note. So I'm going to say, so we'll just leave these numbers in so you can see the order that things happen. So that was update. Well, actually, let's make it more descriptive. So added 2 buttons. And I'm going to put a number here just so you can see the sequence that things are happening. Let's continue with this layout. Let's add a 3rd button. I'm going to commit more frequently than I probably would in the real world, just because I want to show you the sequence of things. So this will be button 3. Let's save. You'll see again some files are out of sync with the repository. We'll commit locally, and this is 3, added button 3. So we'll commit, and let's put a grid on and save. We'll do git commit locally, and let's do this one would be 4, added a grid. Okay. So let's do something tragic here. We've got our nice layout, and accidentally I delete and I save. Without Git, we would have just run into a major problem unless you had taken a backup very recently. However, with the built-in tools, we can easily just go to an individual file, right-click, go to Git Tools, and revert, which will send it back to the original state, or we can do that with an entire folder. So let's do it with the whole web folder. Git Tools, revert. Now it's saying, do you really want to revert? Yes, we do. And of course, our files have changed, and we're back to our previous state. So that's what I mean by it's a real safety net to get you back to a previous state if you've made a catastrophic error or if you've intentionally gone off and explored. I'm going to go into the terminal here. I'm just going to get to the desktop and then into my application 12. And if I do a command here, so we're working with Git in the terminal. If I go git status, actually better than that, let's go git log. And you can see here that it's doing a reverse chronological summary of commits that we've done. So say for instance I wanted to go back to where we only had 2 buttons. I can copy, now you can't do this in Windows, copy and paste doesn't work in any tools I've used, but here it does, is now I can go back to that state. So I can go git reset, that's a keyword hard, and you'll learn this as you go on with Git if you learn the command line. And I'm just going to paste in that hash or a portion of that hash, press enter. It says it's gone back to that point. I'm going to revert. Now we're at the 2 button stage when we committed at that point. And it's not only going backwards, is I can say, well, in reality I actually want to go back to where we were in the future. I made a mistake. That was not what I wanted to do. And I just swap in the other hash and we're back out to our full state. So you can see you can rewind, fast forward very easily, very quickly, and have very little effect or consequences with trying things and really being experimental and pushing the limits as far as learning and being agile with your development. So that's local commits. I hope you can see the benefit there. I'd recommend you learn it. It's will really save you a lot of time going forward. So let's talk about collaborating with GitHub. GitHub is a service that's a common place to share public code. So a lot of developers interact there. They share code ideas or they work on open source public libraries. Public repositories are free. If you want a private repository, there's a monthly fee attached. There are other Git hosting services. The one I would mention is Atlassian Bitbucket. GitHub is by far the largest because of the social nature behind it. But GitHub is really a great place for open source and experimental or demo code. So if you've got a project that you think is interesting and you want to share it with the community, GitHub's a great place to post it. So we'll go into Wakanda Studio, and I'm going to actually go to my browser. Let's go to my GitHub account. So it's github.com, and I'm just going to go straight to my account, which is McCarville. And you'll see here, this is sort of the social aspect. I'm following 7 developers. I've got someone following me. Here's my activity, and here's my repositories. So you can see these are projects that I've got visible to the public, and I'm going to show you how to create a new repository from Wakanda Studio. So here's our project. I've decided I want to share this with all of my developer friends. I'm going to go here to Git, and I'm going to go push to GitHub. Now first do set your credentials, which I've done and showed you earlier in this screencast, and we'll put in a description here. Click OK, and you'll see that it needs, do you want to create the repository because it's not there currently? Yes, we do. You'll see down here it's going to give you a status, and there, we've published. So let's go back to the browser, look at my repositories, we'll refresh, and we have a brand new repository here called My Application 12 with all of my files just like I would want them. So that's how easy it is to push it up to GitHub. So let's talk about collaboration. And to talk about this, first let's talk about what cloning is. I'm going to go back to Studio, and I'm going to actually close this solution, and I'm going to throw it in the trash. So it's gone. So we'll clear that menu of recent solutions. So from scratch, if you found a great library on GitHub that you want to work with, it's as easy as opening a new or creating a new solution. I'm just going to go clone from GitHub, put in my credentials, and in GitHub you'll find your URL is right here for that repository. So I'll put that in the repository URL. give it a name, tell it where to save, and I'll choose clone. And you can see right away on my desktop is the is the code. It asks you if you want to start the server, so it's very similar to creating your own solution. And here's all the files just like they were on GitHub. Now we're going to talk about collaborating. So let's go to, I've got a Windows laptop. Obviously it's not very fast, it's an old one. But I've got Wakanda Studio running on there, and I'm going to basically switch over to it and pretend that I'm another user. So this other user wants to work on this project as well. So I'll put in my credentials and the same repository URL, which was https://github.com/mccarville was my application 12.git, and there we go. We'll clone it. So the same way we did on the original laptop. There it is. Okay, so I've got a problem there. So let's try this again. So let's clone it on this machine. Got to cut this out. So let's clone it on this machine. We'll go clone from GitHub. Put in the username for this user, the password, and the repository URL, same as the other one, github.com/mccarville/myapplication12.git. And I just want to make sure that that's correct. Yep. Okay. And the name and clone. And there we go. Select a Wakanda Server because I just installed this. And it's going to say, do you want to start? I'm not going to start. Okay, so we've got the same project on two different machines. So let's start making some edits. I'll go here first on the PC. I'll go to index, and we've got the same view here, except I want to make a change. I want to pull button 3 down to the bottom. I'm going to save it, and you'll see I'm out of sync with my repository. What I'm going to do is first I have to set up my Git settings in here before I can do any Git functions. Okay. We're going to push this up to GitHub. So, push to GitHub, and what that's going to do is going to send my changes up to GitHub and save them. So I moved button 3. Okay. You'll see the status down here, and you'll see that the access is forbidden, and this is expected. So what that means is the author of the Git repository actually has to assign permissions. So I'm going to go to Settings, I'm going to go to Collaborators, and I'm going to add Fake McCarville. And once I do this, now you'll see I've given access so that this user can now commit. So the first thing you need to do is provide access to the developers. So we'll do that again. Moved button 3. Okay. Now it's pushing just fine because we've given it the permissions. We'll let that finish. We'll switch over to GitHub. Go back to my application, and you'll see here now that Fake Greg has made some changes. So let's go to my original user, and let's bring those changes to this machine. So it's a good idea to do what's called a pull every time you're sitting down to work for the first time during the day or after a break, just so you can see what changes have been made by your colleagues or fellow developers. So you can see it's pulling from GitHub now. I'll take a second. And it's pulled successfully. Open the web folder, we'll open up index, and you can see we've got the change from the PC. So let's make an additional change. We'll put button 2 down here as well. We'll save, and we'll push to GitHub. We'll put a note in, or a description. Moved button 2, OK. That will push up to GitHub. Done. In GitHub, when I refresh, you'll see that those changes are all reflected, and you can actually get a history of commits and see exactly what's happened. So you've got a timeline of changes, which is really helpful when you're collaborating. And I'll go back to the PC, and one more time let's pull this down. So pull from GitHub, and down it comes. And it didn't update automatically. It should, but let's open up and refresh, and you'll see that button 2 is now down here. Now here I'm going to show you what happens if you both change the same thing at the same time. So multiple developers change the same thing. So I'm going to resize button 2 and put it in the middle here. And I'm going to save that, and I'm going to push that change up to GitHub. So the same thing as we've been doing. And we'll do resized and moved button 2. Okay, we'll let that upload. And while that's going, let's switch over to this one, the Mac, and let's just put it back up at the top and put a new title. So just to verify, this has been done. You can see that we resized and moved button 2, so that's been done. And now we're going to make a change to that same button, and now we're going to save it, and we're going to pull. So see, there are one or more conflicts, please resolve them. So I'm going to click OK, and I've set up my diff tool. Now this is sized badly, but this is DIFFMERGE, and what it is, I'm just going to show you the very basics here, but you can see what it's doing is the center document is what you have decided your document will be, and you can basically decide to replace the left or the right here. So I'm going to replace with this, and then we can just save this file and we're good to go. And again, I'm not going to show you a lot on DIFFMERGE. And then you've got, well, we wrote over with the left, so this is what it looks like now. So what happens is if you make changes on the same piece of code, it will alert you that there's a conflict, and it will say that you've got, it'll pop up the DIFFMERGE tool or whatever you choose to use. There's about 30 tools for conflict resolution, and you just continue forward that way. So now let's talk about our last topic here. We'll talk about DIFFMERGE. So again, DIFFMERGE is a common tool for visually merging conflicts. The easiest setup is to download the installer, not the zip or the disk image. That was my experience. I would look at this URL if you're on Mac. It helped me tremendously. This wasn't fun for me to set up. I got it done on my Mac. I didn't spend a lot of time trying to get it done on the PC. But I believe that going forward, the goal is to make this setup try and make this setup a little bit easier for Wakanda users. So we talked about GitHub collaboration, or I showed you GitHub collaboration. So like I said, before you start working for the day, it's a good idea to pull. And then you have the current changes of anyone else who's working on the project. If you're on a formal team, it's a good practice to maybe communicate what areas you'll be working in so you can avoid conflicts, or when possible. It's not the most fun task dealing with conflicts. So if you can avoid them from the beginning, it's a good idea. So let's talk about Wakanda as a Git server. We've used GitHub, and you can have private repositories. Bitbucket from Atlassian, it's free private repositories, so keep that in mind as well if you have a closed sourced application. But you can also use Wakanda as a Git server, so it allows you to work collaboratively inside of a secure network. There's no fees. It's not fee-based. It's obviously your own software, so you don't have a monthly fee. So if you have extremely sensitive projects or organizations who are very sensitive in that regard, it's good for that. The feature set is limited compared to other leading offerings, so be aware of that as well. So let's do a demo of collaborating with Wakanda. So the way you do this, first I'm going to use my PC as the server. So I'm going to start right from scratch. I'm going to close this solution, and I'm going to actually trash it. I'm going to do the same on my Mac, just so we can be 100% sure that we're starting from the same place. And I'm going to clone them both. So we're going to clone from GitHub, and we'll do the same project. Okay, so I'll get that one going, and while that one's going, let's get our PC going. So this was github.com/myapplication12.git. Okay, we'll clone that. We'll check back on the Mac. Okay, so that one's ready to go. And sure, we'll start the server there. But more importantly, so here on the Windows machine, I'm going to start the server. Yes. But most importantly, you'll see down here we've got the server will start up. Okay, and the debugger starts up as well. I actually want to stop the debugger, so I'll go to run stop debugger, because this is one requirement of using this as the server. So let's go back to looking at the Mac, and we're going to actually connect through the local network. Now you can connect to a Wakanda server running in the cloud as well. I'm going to go run connect to remote server. Now I'm having a bit of an issue with this right now on this build, but what you would do is you would go connect. It's not going to work here. And then it's the exact same workflow with its git and its push and pull from remote server. And that will work the same way that GitHub does behind your local network, and really have some benefit for you that way. So to finish up, let's talk about our next webinar. You won't want to miss this one. I'm going to be talking about performance tuning tips for Wakanda. It's going to help you make your application scream. We're going to look at hopefully 5 or 6, depending on time, specific scenarios that I think a lot of people frequently run into, and we're going to talk about how to attack these problems in the most effective way. I'm going to show you the way that a lot of people make a mistake and the way that you should do it and have dramatically better performance. We're going to do that March 21st at the same time, 9 a.m. Pacific. So I appreciate you coming out. We're going to continue on with Git. Give it a try. I've posted a few projects that I think you'd be interested in, or one project in particular, which is under McCarville, and it's this one, Wakanda Playground, and that has some data generation in it. So if you're wanting to explore Wakanda, I'd recommend you take a look at this Wakanda Playground and generate some data and take a look at the product.